Well, Mr. Paul. Hey, buddy. We're going to start on this side of your box. Paul sent me up this old school. This is a davemade. We're looking at the bottom side of a davemade 2x8. And we're going to start on the bottom side. So first thing I did, now there was more than adequate amount of wire that was in the bottom of this amp. But it wasn't tied up, wasn't secured. And as we've all seen, the box let the fire out. That if you don't secure the wires on the bottom side of the mobile boxes, one of these wires can sneak over and sit between the cabinet and the heatsink, and you can eventually end up having a fire. So the other thing I wanted to do is I wanted to extend the leads for him off the back of the amp. So what I did is, instead of using 10 gauge, let's see, is that what this is? This is JBC wire cable, power forged power cable wire, 10 gauge. 10 gauge, right? Right there. I went in and I replaced it with 8 because more is better. And I used Stinger Pro Audio cable, which is copper nickel plated oxygen free cable. So I wanted to show that. The other thing is, I don't think they've changed the bandsaw blade at Joe's camp, because this is made by Joe in the Carolinas. This isn't New York davemade whatsoever. You can tell because the heat sinks aren't straight. They've always got a swoop to them. And in the last 2 or 3 years, that swoop's gotten drastic. Like, instead of it being nice and straight, now the swoop on the end of the heat sink cuts like this. So usually what they do, instead of have a straight edge here, it'll swoop back. But all nice and grommeted. Don't worry, Paul. By the time you get this back, it'll have a nice hydraulically pressed eyelet on it. And then I'll hook you up some kind of ground wire that is roughly the same length. And we'll go ahead and we'll braid that up and make it look all pretty like I do, you know. But I threw everything but the kitchen sink at this for you, Paul. We stripped all the power wires out of it. I changed out a bunch of shit, and let's get to talking about that. Paul's number one thing he wanted to have happen was this back here. He wanted to have a ground strap added right here. So what we did, Paul, is I built you a nice solid copper strip ground strip that comes off your ground nut, goes directly down to the board and is soldered ground. Now the other major thing that I like to do to these davemades is, let's go around here to the back. And let's look at the vent. Now air is like water or like electricity. It will always follow the path of least resistance. So if you have a full third of your heatsink vent above the deck, so what I mean is that the air is going to get pressurized in on this side, going to blow down on the components, wrap around the end of the cabinet. If you've got a full third of that deck exposed where air can flow out of, how much velocity do you think we're losing? I mean, honestly. If we're pressurizing the top side of this cabinet and it's got a nice big vent that's 4 or 5 inches long, and another one over here 4 or 5 inches long behind the coax connectors, it's just running out the back of the box. So instead of getting this nice laminar airflow where it flows down, wraps around, goes along the length of the heatsink and comes out the bottom of the cabinet, we end up having this tumble effect. We're going to have a low pressure here and a higher pressure here. So we're going to end up losing a bunch more air out of the cabinet. So I went ahead and I soldered some nice phenolic with copper on it, soldered them in place so they're not going nowhere. Nice good ground strap, retuned the box, and then I took these old small caps out of here, which half of them were testing subpar. They just were not coming up, and this one here is like paper light, so we know it's dry. So I went ahead and I pulled all the caps out, and I replaced all the caps with almost 4 times the amount of capacitance. Now, Paul has got himself a super capacitor set up in his truck. Now, what I mean by that is he's got a 250 amp alternator. He's got 2 of those Maxwell supercapacitors, and he's running a 24 pill and a 4 pill off of just the capacitors in the stock battery. And his voltage does not move, does not back up, does not run away. But I got to assume that he might not always have this truck with that caps in it and all that stuff. So I went ahead and gave him a little bit of filtering. This electrically does very little compared to the supercapacitors. And for a long time, this is all we had. This is the best technology we had as far as electrostatic storage. Electrochemical static storage. Okay, because usually when people think of chemical storage, they think of batteries. When you think of capacitors, you got to think more along the lines of an electrostatic stored charge. And you definitely have to think that way with the supercapacitors, because that is how they work. So we went in here and there were no blocking beads on the output wires at all, on any level. So I desoldered all of that stuff, upgraded you to 8-gauge wire. We went ahead and put type 61 on there. Then we added the B-Plus rail mods to it. Did it on the driver's section as well. Now, Paul, I want to point this out to you. I didn't know if you knew this or not, but that's two 2879 red dots driving 8 2879 red dots. So this box is a little hot. It's a little hot. What I mean by that is it's going to be very low drive. Now, the wonderful thing about this box is it doesn't have the stupid variable power knob. Now, a lot of guys like those things, but it is the weakest link in the chain. So let's say you got this shoved under your seat and you're sitting there talking on it. And you don't have that knob fully open. So it's backed up a little bit. And you put your 40-watt radio in there. That knob will eventually burn a spot in the variable potentiometer, and you're going to have problems. Personally, I think you should be able to vary the power on your radio. About the only guys that can't are the dudes that got Cobra 29s, and I don't know about you, most of the people I know are on D-Rail radios, Wolfman CB shop radios, or Truck CB sales, or Big Rig radios, Big Rig CB radios. Where everybody's got variable power. It's a variable power is like a standard anymore. It's like in everything, right? So we don't need to have a variable on the front of the amplifier. It builds a natural weakness into it. This thing never had it in there. But it's clean. I went through and I cleaned it all up, Paul. I washed this thing out and made it all nice and clean and pretty for you. Got all the dust out of it. Checked all the capacitors in it. Now, Joe Gunn, no, not Joe Gunn, don't say that, that's wrong. Dave made, Joe built, I guess the way we'll put it. He's pretty famous. He doesn't believe in putting balance resistors on the input splitter or the output combiner. But I went ahead and I added those. I got rid of the 2 watts here on the outputs of each one of the 4-pill sections. I built you a whole new output coil because the one that was in here was all splayed out like spaghetti. And then I took the input coil, and they do this little half hoop thing. Well, the problem is with the half hoop thing is it hangs out in free space and it's constantly bouncing up and down. So if you got this in a mobile, it's going to sit here and wiggle and wiggle and wiggle and wiggle and wiggle. And what I've seen a million times is this capacitor right down here where they mount them to the board, when they have the original input coil, which is an induction wire, they just hoop it out. They bring it way out and they hang it out here in free space. Very unsupported. That capacitor breaks off, you lose your input tune goes real high, the output power of the box falls way off, and you usually end up blowing up your radio because the input SWR, or the input tune of the amplifier, drops and goes into an ugly range. So I pulled that coil up, removed it, got a new piece of copper out, coiled it up, made it nice and tight and small, and so now it's in there nice and tight. We don't have to worry about any overtime flopping and whopping and vibration. The other thing you wanted me to do is replace your on-off switch. Now, don't get excited, but when they wire these in the Carolinas, for some reason they wire them so the down is on. Well, if you think about it, your fans are on the top, and everywhere else in the universe, up is on, down is off. I went ahead and flipped this around so it made sense. Up, on, down, off. Super simple. That's it. Straightforward, right? Okay, let's run around the band real quick. We're going to run this thing at 14 volts today, because I know my buddy Paul, he's probably going to run this at 13.8. So if I give him a higher number than 14 volts, he's going to see different numbers, and he'll be like, BBI, you lied to me. That's not what I want to have happen. 1,000 watt slug MPEP, 1,000 watt slug in average, 5 watt slug in reverse, back from the bird, 10,000 watt dummy load. Ooh, okay. We're going to use a 5 watt slug between the 2950 and, of course, the davemade 2x8. So let me show you drive. Showing this to you in peak. Our nice, shocking, I know, I know BBI. Your radio only does 20 watts? That's right, because I get the output power of this thing reduced fairly by half. That way I can keep from blowing up the finals when I'm doing input tunes. Show you talking through the box. Fairly low. Nice and beautiful. We're dead keying it at 1 watt, Paul. Well, wait a minute. Actually, shut the amp off. Now we'll just key the radio. 0.5 watt. It's unrealistic. Let's give it just over a hair of a watt. Hair of a watt of the dog that bit you. Yes, sir. Just about as useful as a ball gag at a freaking gangbang. Okay, here we go. We are going to want to run that up just a little bit. I bet you that's about a 2 watt carrier. Oh, the other thing I did is I did away with the input attenuation resistors that were down here. There was a voltage divider, and I actually tuned the box out so it was nice and smooth and clean. Okay, so I shut the amp back off. Let's see what we got for dead key. 1.5 watts. Really? Amplifier? Turn slug back around, turn the amp back on. 1.5 watts dead key, swinging to... about 21, 22 watts. Turn the amp back on. About 40 watt carrier. Just disappears. Just disappears. Straight out disappears. So let's come over here. We'll put it on 2X. So now we all know halfway, right there at that 50 mark, right? Right there on Jelly Bellies. Right there. That's 1,000 watts. So over here fully deflected is going to be 2,000 watts. With a 25, 30 watt radio, 20 watt radio hitting this amplifier on 14 volts. Seeing 2,000 watts of output power. Let's see what we're going to get out of it for average. 500 to 600 bird. And that's tuned into a 10,000 watt dummy load with less than 0.5 watt of reflag. As long as your antenna system's straight, which I know it is, you're going to see pretty close to the same results. Okay, input tune. Less than 0.5 watt. Now let's do the fun bit. Can you hear the Wolfman in the background? Oh, Wolfman radio. Okay. Let's hook up the RMS machine. Wolfman CB radio. I think anybody that's in CB right now has been trying to get a hold of Mr. Derail, Mr. Joshua Darrell Black, my buddy, my friend, to put their hands on one of these. This is a Derail Cobra 29 that we're hooking up at the moment. And this is going to put a little bit more drive into it, but we're not going to see a whole lot more peak power output. We're going to see a whole lot more bird. Okay, let's turn the Derail radio on. So got our mic gain all the way up. The CB's up. Which I do believe that means that this is with all the limiters involved. We're going to turn this back down to 1X. Let's see what we put in this for drive. About 35 watts. Let's make sure we got the dead key about the same. 1.5 watts. Right on. So let's turn this back around. Put that over on 2X. Turn this back on. Average power. Remember that was 2,000 watts. Average power. I want to show you what this is pulling for amperage. Remember, a straight 8 pill, how that's going to work is going to pull about 200, 210 amps, somewhere in there. 250 amps worth of draw. Those are the numbers, and that's what I'm sticking with at the moment. 800 Bird with a Wolfman radio, hot rodded Wolfman radio, and 2000, 2100 peak envelope power. Paul, I appreciate you sending this up. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to work on it. It's all cleaned up. It's ready to go back home. It's going to last you another 5, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. Knowing the way that you run it, I'll probably end up having to buy it off your kids when you pass on and go to Jesus. Go flying in the clouds in the sky. Anyhow, gentlemen, my name is BBI, and without a shadow of a doubt, I am the biggest mud duck in Idaho. Come check us out, www.bbims.com. Come find Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat, Instagram, YouTube. And if you are a first-time viewer, I ask you please, take a minute, click subscribe. Make sure to click the notification button. That way you can watch more of this amplifier porn that's coming to you straight out of the tater patch country. Gentlemen, I'm out of here. Off to the next one. I gotta go finish that 48 pill. That's what I'm on to next. I'll see you guys. I'm out of here. Bump, bump. BBI. Gone.